Alabama, and you better watch out. The landlord gets you gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, they can tell you what it's all about. Cause them landlords, if they get you, boy, they gonna hang you. Go to Alabama, and you better watch out. The landlord gets you gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, tell you what it's all about. I'm gonna talk to a jolers and Central is angry me. Don't you never try to make nobody in Alabama read. Go to Alabama and you better watch out. The landlord again, you're gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, tell you what it's all about. Go to Alabama and you better watch out. The landlord again, you're gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, tell you what it's all about. I'm gonna tell all the colored people, they've been on Sugar Hill. Don't you never go to Alabama to try to live.
On March 26th, 1931, 9 black youths riding a freight train were arrested after being falsely accused of raping 2 white women. After nearly being lynched, they were brought to trial in Scottsboro, Alabama. Despite evidence that exonerated the young men, including a retraction in 1933 by one of their accusers, the state pursued the case. All white juries delivered guilty verdicts against the 9 defendants, and all but the youngest, who was a 12-year-old, were sentenced to death. From 1931 to 1937, during a series of appeals and new trials, they remained in prison where they were repeatedly brutalized by guards. In 1932, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that the Scottsboro defendants had been denied adequate counsel at trial. In 1935, the Supreme Court again ruled in favor of the defendants, overturning their convictions because Alabama had systematically excluded blacks from jury service. Finally, in 1937, 4 of the defendants were released. The other 5 were given sentences from 20 years to life. And 4 out of those 5 were paroled between 1943 and 1950. The 5th escaped prison in 1948 and fled north to Michigan. No crime in American history, let alone a crime that never occurred, produced as many trials, convictions, reversals, and retrials as the case of the Scottsboro boys.
They've been on Sugar Hill. Don't you never go to Alabama to try to live. Go to Alabama and you better watch out. The landlord gets you gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, tell you what it's all about. Go to Alabama and you better watch out. The landlord gets you gonna jump and shout. Scottsboro boys, tell you what it's all about being out. Do it again, didn't understand you.
Yes, the great Lead Belly, one of the most important singer-songwriters in American history, with his song Scottsboro Boys, about the subjects of this segment. On March 25th, 1931, 24 people were hoboing on a freight train traveling between Chattanooga and Memphis, Tennessee. The hobos were an equal mix of black people and white people, but the group of white young boys saw 18-year-old Haywood Patterson on the train and attempted to push him off, claiming that it was a white man's train. A group of whites then gathered rocks and attempted to force all the black teenagers from the train. Patterson and the other black teenagers were able to ward off the group. Then the humiliated white teenagers jumped or were forced off the train and reported to a nearby train master that they had been attacked by a group of black teenage boys. Shortly thereafter, the police stopped and searched the train at Paint Rock, Alabama, and arrested the black teenage boys. This was the beginning of one of the most infamous miscarriages of justice in American history, the Scottsboro boys case. This week, 95 years ago, two young white females were also taken to the jail, where they accused the young black men of rape. The case was first heard in Scottsboro, Alabama, in 3 rushed trials in which the defendants received poor legal representation, basically none. All but the youngest, 14-year-old Roy Wright, were convicted of rape and sentenced to death, the common sentence in Alabama at the time for black men convicted of raping white women, even though there was no medical evidence indicating that rape had taken place. The boys 13 and 19 were quickly arrested. Within days, the boys were tried in rush proceedings with all white juries, virtually no legal representation, and little to no time to prepare a defense. Despite weak and contradictory evidence, 8 of the 9 young men were sentenced to death. But there were obviously key problems with this case. These young men were in the Jim Crow South, where black defendants had virtually no chance of a fair trial. Their lawyers were unprepared and ineffective. Obviously, there was questionable evidence because medical examinations did not support any of the rape claims. And one accuser, Ruby Bates, literally recanted her story, admitting the accusations were false. But yet, these young men were still convicted and sentenced to death. Now, a big part of the reason that this case is so important, is because it really was one of the first cases in which you saw the budding civil rights coalition building in the early 30s. I talk about this a lot on this show. The New Deal, Great Society, Civil Rights Coalition of the 1930s to the 1970s. This was one of the first cases. One of the first cases to really that the justice community coalesced around. You heard Leadbelly in the intro singing his song Scottsboro Boys, a protest song about the legal lynching of these young men. But what people may be surprised to find out is that the first people to come to the aid of these young men before the NAACP or anybody else was the Communist Party of America. That's right. That's right. The Communist Party's attorney came to aid these young black men first. After a demonstration in Harlem, the Communist Party USA took an interest in the Scottsboro case. Chattanooga Party members James S. Allen edited the Communist Southern Worker and publicized the plight of the boys. The party used its legal arm, the International Labor Defense, to take up their cases and persuaded the defendants' parents to let the party champion their cause. The ILD, or again, the International Labor Defense, retained attorneys George W. Chamley, who filed the first motions, and Joseph R. Brodsky. So this is how all these appeals started to take place. The case would go to the U.S. Supreme Court multiple times and led to landmark rulings like Powell versus Alabama, where the court ruled that the defendants were denied the right to adequate legal counsel. This would establish that states must provide effective attorneys in capital cases. Also, Norris v. Alabama, where the court ruled that excluding black people from juries violated their constitutional rights. Again, this is incredible for the 1930s and 1940s America. These decisions would become foundational for modern criminal procedure and civil rights protections. So eventually these legal battles would go on for years with retrials and appeals. Some convictions were overturned, but others were reconvicted in spite of weak evidence. And one of the accusers literally admitting that she made the whole thing up. The last of the defendants was not released until 13 years later, in 1944. None were executed, but many spent years, some over a decade, in prison. And keep it 100, it is kind of a miracle that any of them got out of jail at all, considering it was 1930s America. We've done a segment on the youngest person to be executed in America. I forget what his name was. He was 14 years old. George Stinney. George S. Stinney was executed, I believe, in 1944 in South Carolina around the same time in another case with extremely dodgy evidence, and he wasn't so lucky. You know, he didn't get out of the trumped up charges that they put on him, and he was executed, the youngest person in modern history to be executed at, I believe he was 14 years old at the time he was executed. In 2013, the state of Alabama would issue posthumous pardons to the remaining defendants, and now the case is widely recognized as a symbol of racial injustice and wrongful convictions. This case would spark national and international outrage, particularly amongst leftist groups. And I always like to highlight those types of things because, again, on a fairly regular basis, I like to talk about why this government and the powers that be in this country want you to hate certain people and certain entities. Why do they want you to hate the communists so much? Why do they want you to hate Cuba so much? Why do they want you to hate Venezuela so much? Why do they want you to hate China so much? Or they want you to hate Iran, or they want you to hate Russia, or whatever. And the more I learn and do my research into these types of cases, and I come to the conclusion over and over again that the communists, the socialists, these type of entities, these parties, they were on the civil rights bandwagon on the train before anybody else. In this case right here, the Scottsboro boys, the Communist Party of America were the ones who got these young men the initial defense they really needed to get these appeals to eventually get out of jail. The NAACP came later. The NAACP were too scared to jump on at first. It was the Communist Party of the United States of America. They were the ones who supported the Scottsboro boys initially. And you go back in history and you look at people like Paul Robeson, who's one of the great black men, one of the great men, period, of the 20th century. There was a reason. There was a reason that this government went out of their way to destroy him. And he ended up going to the Soviet Union back when they were communist. And he was treated like a god over there. Much better than he was in his own country. You have one of the best football players of his time, one of the best singers of his time, one of the best actors of his time. I don't think there is an equivalent to a Paul Robeson in today's America. I can't think anybody who's, you know, one of the biggest music artists, one of the biggest sports stars, and one of the biggest actors at the same time. But that's who Paul Robeson was. And once again, while he was fighting for civil rights in this country, the most basic civil rights, who were the people that were aligned with him? The communists, the socialists, the leftists. Those are the people who were aligned with him. And so now you know why they want you to hate the socialists and the communists so bad. Meanwhile, these people are literally protecting the Wall Street people. They're literally protecting the military-industrial complex people, the mass incarcerators, the whole Epstein class, while they commit genocides, while they literally have child sex slaves. And none of us do anything or seem to be able to do much about it. But if you listen to the corporate media and you listen to the institutions that these people have control over, they tell you it's the communists you're supposed to hate. It's the socialists you're supposed to hate. It's the leftists you're supposed to hate. Really? Who are the ones persecuting the Scottsboro boys? And who are the ones defending them? And that's a very important that's a very important distinction to make. It's a part of the reason why they hate Fidel Castro so much. Fidel Castro supported the anti-apartheid efforts in South Africa and Southern Africa in general. He was friends with Malcolm X, him and Che Guevara. They want you to hate any entities that supported civil rights and that support labor rights. Those are the bad guys. The people who are on the right side of history and have been proven to be on the right side of history, no, those are the bad guys. You got to support good old USA, the capitalists, the corporatists, the Epstein class. Those are the good guys, the ones who keep us in endless wars. Those are the good guys, not the ones who fight against the Epstein class and the corporate class. And this is just another one of those situations where, you know, it's important to remember cases like this, like the Scottsboro case, in spite of the fact it happened 95 years ago this week, because it's important to know where we came from. We wouldn't have had Martin Luther King. We wouldn't have had Malcolm X. We wouldn't have had all the gains of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s if back in the 1930s, you don't have left-wing movements and you don't have radicals and activists who were supporting cases like this when it was wholly important to most of the country, particularly white America. Very unpopular at the time. And so I think that, let me get this caller. Hello, caller, what's up?
Oh, I'm just interested and excited about the conversation.
Yes,
because
yes.
Really, this is the crux of World War and the cause of war in the world today. It's all about capitalism and communism, socialism, and so-called free market, guided by the democratic and free hand and the powerful good hand of profit. Mm-hmm. And profit has nothing good to give to anybody because it takes from everybody and give to a few and give them control over everybody else. Mm-hmm. That's the way it has gone. That's the way it is now. And that's the way they want it to continue.
Yep.
Don't examine the economic system for the value of truth or righteousness.
Nope.
Examine it for how the ones in charge can get more in charge and richer and more powerful.
Yep.
Everything else comes after that.
I heard that. Well,
and from our perspective, it ain't done nothing for us.
Nope.
And we have done so much and gone through so much, you can't even repay us.
Nope.
We certainly have the right to choose whatever system we want to choose. Mm-hmm. And we just happen to choose the same system that Jesus chose. This is the sample. This is the product of our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. And this is what they want to stop. And this is what I'm here for. Jesus is in charge. Did he charge the 5,000 one penny? And everybody had enough? Did he charge anybody anything? He gave it and told us to do the same thing. If that ain't communism and socialism, it's a dictionary definition. To eat everything that you need, and from me, everything that you have to offer. And everybody has everything in common. That does not exist in capitalism. It's the enemy of capitalism. At the same time, it's our religion. It's a tool of capitalism. It's a tool of capitalism. It's become a tool of capitalism because the faith is in the money and not in Jesus. And if it's in Jesus, we'll have a socialistic, communistic world where everybody has everything in common according to what God gave us. God gave us Africa. That's enough. And he gave everybody something. Look at the Western Hemisphere. Gave it to the red man. You can't hardly find it. Replaced by the Europeans, who act like God didn't give them anything. They had to go further than that to satisfy their appetite. They had to take the red man. They had to take the black man and slave the black man to do the hard work. Not just for a couple of years, not just for tens of years, but hundreds of years. And we got a right to choose whatever system that God shows us. That God shows us.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for your call, brother. I got to get out of here. But thank you.
All right.
Thank you for calling.